So I am a relationship coach, and I started studying relationship about 20 years ago. And, they say from your pain comes your gift. And I was really struggling in my own relationships and wanted to kind of figure out, is it me or is it my partner? And so I really took a step back and did a lot of study in this area and really skilled myself up. And also I took a look at, my mindsets and where I was maybe projecting onto my partner or having those victim mindsets that many of us default to over time. And so to work with that, I did a lot of healing around my trauma. And so those two arcs formed, my relational and recovery, those skills, and then the trauma work as well. And that's how I work with my couples. I feel that top down and bottom up work is very important to really have that healthy up level partnership.
So you're working with couples for the most part, or is it strictly couples?
I would say strictly couples. Sometimes there's some individual work that comes out of that, but mainly I feel like the highest form of healing is really in the couple relationship.
That's interesting. And the reason why I asked that is I like to get that perspective because most of the people I work with, they're in relationships, but they come to me by themselves, and most of them are women from 35 and older.
Yes.
So what is like the demographic for the couples that you're working with age-wise?
Yeah, I would say similar to that, couple who's been married kind of 10 years or less and just still kind of in that power struggle stage would be my more of my home zone.
Yeah, that 10-year mark seems to be like I remember I was like reviewing some of the data and they would say that a lot of divorces happen around that 10-year mark depending on the state and well you're in America, right? And places like that. So it's always interesting, at least from me, when I get the women who are in a relationship and it's really new, similar to you, right? It's like, okay, these are what I want and this is really good. And then there's like a point where it's like, aha, something happened here. Is that some of the things
Yes.
that you see in the people that you work with?
Absolutely. We call this the power struggle stage of relationship after that honeymoon period, and it's a universal phenomenon, contrary to what we're told by Hollywood. And so it's a very important, that people have an understanding that relationships have stages, and the power struggle stage is really a threshold rather than an impasse if you have the right insights and ability to kind of roll up your sleeves and work through it. But it's a very important stage.
Why do you think some people experience that even though for the most part we all go into a relationship in good faith?
So there's a theory that we have uniquely chosen a partner who will trigger our most unresolved trauma, and that they are designed to kind of activate those unhealed parts of ourselves. And so in a way, relationship is nature's way of healing us if we do take up the call. And so something will come up sooner or later. It's just a matter of when, really.
I think, well, not that I think, I know I went through something like that. There's someone I dated, and funny story. She was so used to doing everything on her own because the men that she dated before me or in her past, they were very reliant on her. They weren't self-sufficient men. And I know a lot of times men are looked at as the provider, the protector, and things like that. So for a lot of women that I find is that when they get men who are more so like their child versus their partner, they're doing everything, for them to up to the point where literally almost washing their ass for some of them, right? And for her, it was a little bit of a struggle because just carrying the groceries out of the store, she had to like fight the urge to do it herself, right?
Yeah, this is a very common phenomenon, and I will, cop that I've been guilty of that in the past as well. And I had to go through a whole process to kind of retrain my feminine to receive, because we are so taught as women that we need to be able to do and give and overgive and nurture and all these things. It's kind of innate in our nature. But, when you get into, a relationship where you have a feminine, masculine energies, there can only be one masculine who is, taking charge or leading in one moment. And that can switch. It's not like the man needs to be in that role all of the time. But I think the working edge for most women is to be able to lean back and, let the men lead, because that lets him be a man. I think a lot of women don't realize that it actually is a gift to him to be able to step into that role and nourish her. And then it's actually not attractive most of the time for her to be giving to him if that's really out of balance.
And I guess that leads me to two questions I would have. Why do you think the men, well, sorry, why do you think men are doing that to the women? And why do you think women are staying in relationships where that is happening?
Well, some couples are comfortable with that by choice, where you have a woman kind of taking on more of the masculine energy, and the man has more of the feminine energy. And so for some women, their need for control outweighs the need for the masculine to be strong within. And so it's kind of like an unspoken agreement. And for some people, it works. But in my opinion, sooner or later, that will lead to issues in the bedroom because most women who are feminine in their core want that masculine to really ravish them. And so if this equation is out of balance, it does have an impact.
And that's some of the concern I find with some of my male acquaintances where they're in a position just because they can do it, they do it. And what's happening when I see the impact that it has to women is that the women will go out there and they will think what is abnormal is normal. So when they're seeking out future partners now who are in their masculine, as you mentioned, they respond in a toxic manner because now instead of embracing it, they're attacking it. And then once you start to speak to them about it, they're like, oh, yeah, I'm not supposed to be that way. But my last five partners were that way. It's all I've known. And what has happened, I think, a lot of times with the women who are in this way, it's not like they've dated these people for 6 months, 3 months, whatever. It's long periods of time. So it's 3 years with one, 5 years with another, 8 years with another. So by the time they wake up and wake out of it, they're in their 40s and 50s and they're like, oh my God, it's been 30 years of insanity. So how does man number six, or how does Marissa, or how does Terrain try to overcome all of that?
These are great questions. And I think that number one, there is a question of how quickly you are willing to do the work to get out of the pain you're in. Some people will stay in the misery long term and then break up and go find another partner with the exactly same pattern. It can take them a while for them to figure it out. Some of us want to learn more quickly, and it is can be a very painful experience. And I think, to be fair, having gone through this paradigm shift myself, I was wholly and completely unaware that the masculine wants to make me happy. I had no knowledge or understanding on this until I literally sent myself to man school. It actually took that kind of, effort to really be curious and understand what was happening in my dynamic with the masculine. And so once I was given this information, then I started to see it everywhere. And then that became much more my reality. And I'm like, oh, I don't need to do everything the masculine wants to give to me. And so it's been such a gift to move through that process. But I would say the default setting for most women is that they have to do in order to be loved.
Were you surprised that you found yourself in that type of situation when you were going through it?
I was, because in my mind, I had it figured out. I thought I was being the cool girl and, adopting all of these behaviors that I had either seen in movies or had read about, and I thought I was doing it the right way, but it was definitely upside down to what the reality was if I wanted a healthy, masculine, feminine relationship, which is definitely something that I came to have a much better understanding of. But there's a responsibility on both sides, to really show up in the right way so that you can create this kind of healthy dynamic and really, gently point out to your partner where that might be falling off the rails. So it is a process. And sometimes we go on that journey on our own and then attract a healthy partner who has also done the work. Or sometimes we end up doing the work together and breaking through that power struggle to the next stage.
That first step that you described, how, I don't want to use the word scary, but how big of a first step is that first step that you described for some of these couples?
It definitely is difficult and kind of disconcerting because we live in so many of these paradigms. We live in this soup of patriarchy, and it teaches us certain ways to be, and it doesn't teach us vulnerability. It doesn't teach us intimacy, and so there is a lot of shocks to the system to have to realize that to do something to have a better relationship than our parents, we have to go outside of common consciousness. And so it really can take a while for these new mindsets to sink in. We have to read books and, you know, get great teachers and really immerse yourself. It's like anything else in life. If you want to be great at it, you have to put the chops in and practice and learn like anything else that for people who are listening that they have become an expert in, that took work. And the same thing for healthy relationship and those polarity dynamics.
There's someone I work with, and I did that with her. She's a little bit older. She's in her 60s.
Hmm.
And she was looking for happiness because she was trying to find love in all the wrong places, as I would say, right, Marissa?
Yes.
I asked her the question. I was like, "Are you currently working?" She says, "Yes." I was like, "Have you done any training for your job?" And she says, "Yes." I was like, "Okay, how many hours, years, or months have you done training?" She's like, "Train. If you add up all the hours, all the weeks, it's probably a number of years of for the job, right?" So I was like, "Okay, perfect. So why don't you do the same for your relationship?" She had
That's
no
right.
answer. I was like, "That's the problem." The problem is how many people honestly view their relationship as something that they need training for. Why is it that we just seem to wake up and say that, you know what, Marissa, you're kind of pretty. Let's get together, let's have a coffee, and that's it. And then if it doesn't work out, you're upset, I'm upset. It's like, no, we didn't do anything to establish how it could be successful. We just basically turned on the TV and I was like, oh my God, I watched a rom com last night and I saw that the guy brought her a latte, and in the latte, it had a heart shaped cream in it. And then, you know what? A couple weeks later, I was proposing. And then a couple months later, we were married. And then within the first year, we had our first child. Yay! In the real world, it doesn't work that way, right, Marissa?
You hit the nail on the head there, Terrain. We're really sold a myth by Hollywood and by society around love and what it takes. And many of us are, in fact, just running on hope, but we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And so love is a skill set that can be learned, but you have to make the effort to learn it. And there really is no excuse in this information age. All the books and the information is out there for the taking. So it's really incumbent on each of us to do the work to rise up to what it is we want to be able to create in our life.
Do you think there's an active push to keep more and more people single and not in a healthy relationship?
Well, there certainly is a trend in the numbers that people are staying single longer, much more career focused. The cost of living is going up. So now everybody has to work so much harder in their career and get that established maybe before they think about having a partner and a child. I don't know that there is, a covert effort around that. I think it's simply a question of the time that we're living in. Um, But I think that, there also are some other forces in that historically, even if we just go back one generation to our parents, there wasn't a very high bar for relationship. I remember my mother saying that her only qualifications were that, the guy did not drink and he had a job. And in just one generation, I can tell you the list of things that, I require in a partner is so much higher. And so the demands for, a relationship now are we want a lifetime lover, we want a soulmate, we want intimacy, we want a best friend. However, we haven't been given the knowledge on how to achieve that. So there's a gap between the desire and the skill sets to create that. And so again, it is being proactive, being in the conversation, listening to podcasts like this, reading, really is the effort that takes to get there.
I did that same thing, and I did that with two friends, one male, one female, and I told them to give me their preferences because we all have a preference, right? Like your mother said that just have a job and don't drink, which are fantastic qualifiers if you ask me, right? Um, and I said, and I asked them, okay, give me five things that you want, and they would name them, and I said, okay, so each preference you have narrows your pool, right? So let's say, for example, I said that I only want to date women under the age of 25. So that would mean, oh, sorry, let me pause here from 19 to 25 before,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
someone clips this and be like, aha, I knew it. We got him finally. 19, age of majority to
Yes,
25
yes,
in this
yes.
hypothetical.
Little Freudian slip there, Coach Terrain.
I know. Can you imagine? So that's going to exclude women who are 25 and a day and older. So my pool is narrow. Now, if I say that she can't have any kids, smaller pool. She has to be 140 pounds or less, smaller pool. She has to have blonde hair, blue eyes, smaller pool. University educated, smaller. Then it gets to the point where it's like, okay, your pool of candidates has now become your prison. And the person's like, what do you mean, Tarina? I was like, well, you're confined by it now because now it's so narrow that there's probably what, a couple of thousand across the world. Now, here's the big question that I asked them. I was like, do you qualify for that thousand people? Like, what do you mean, Taryn? I was like, well, you can want them all you want, but do they want you? And I think maybe that's the true disconnect when it comes to our parents or our grandparents, because their pool was essentially either their neighborhood, their school, their job, or their city. So someone may say that, well, he just has to be able to work and drink. That's because the majority of the men maybe around her had everything else. They were good looking, they were supportive, things of that nature. Some drank, some didn't, some worked, some didn't. Now that our pool is worldwide, we have men that are 6 feet, under 6 feet. We have men that are good looking, not so good looking. We have the factory workers, the doctors, the police officers. If I didn't ever come in contact with a model, would I ever desire a model? Probably not. I would only say, okay, you know what? The girl down the street, the next door, things of that nature. So could it be that maybe some of the things that we want is because we've come in contact with so many options and it gives us a choice to kind of Frankenstein, for lack of a better word, our future partners?
Yeah, I would say that this is definitely one of the factors that's contributing to, the state of dating and singleness in society is what I call the candy store effect. There are so many choices out there now, and we know as humans, actually, the more choices that we have, actually, the more difficult it is. And I think that, a lot of us are focusing on these very external qualities. A lot of what you mentioned were very physical. And yet, what people don't contemplate is what is really going to make them happy. Is this a person who will get up in the middle of the night when the baby is crying? Is this a person who will be my best friend and will be there in my darkest hour? Can this person, are they healthy enough to hold intimacy in this relationship? And so it's some of those more softer qualities that I think we need to really contemplate as well, and that, don't get transmitted through the internet. And so I think that there really is an opportunity to really expand our horizons and look outside our normal requirements, because most people end up with their maybe person. And it's not, you know, this Prince Charming often that we end up with. It's somebody who has most of the qualities, but even qualities that we never even knew we needed until we met them. And so I think that we have to kind of fight against the stream of what's happening in the dating pool and really broaden our horizons if we're having issues finding our partner.
Expand on that when you said your maybe person, because I know some people, and you mentioned the internet, they look at that and some people may interpret that as, well, are you telling me that I have to settle because I'm not getting my ideal choice, but I'm getting someone that has many of the qualities that I want. And as I get to know them better, they have qualities that I didn't think I need. So expand on that a little bit.
I think that many of us are addicted to the chemical high and the instant attraction. And we feel that if we don't have that rush of chemistry the first time we meet them, that it's a no. And so people aren't spending enough time or investing in a person, seeing them maybe two or three times to get to know them as a person before making these decisions. I think that a lot of garage doors come down very quickly. And I know I've certainly have been guilty of that in the past as well. And it's because we think, well, we have all of this choice. There'll be another train coming along. There's so many trains that are coming that we can afford to make these decisions. But if you've been single for a while now, it's something to consider that maybe you do need to adjust your dating approach.
That sounds like a consequence of an abundance mindset, thinking that, okay, if Marissa doesn't wow me on this first date, there's Carla, there's Ivana, there's all these other women, Stacy down the street. So I don't really have to get to know her because there's three other people that can maybe wow me. That's an interesting take on it. And I can appreciate that because maybe that's why so many people push for sex, because one of the easiest ways to connect with someone, at least temporarily, is to be intimate with them because it clouds our judgment, right? There's a dopamine hit, there's a testosterone, there's the thrill of that. But then when that wears off, it's like, oh, what's your name again? So could it be maybe that's why some people are so quick to use sex, because it's an instant connection to that person?
Yes, and I think that again goes back to lack of skill set in creating real intimacy. Intimacy is created outside of the bedroom. You know, sex can be a bonder for sure, but it doesn't actually require all that intimacy sometimes. And so I think that vulnerability and that bonding that can happen before you get into the bedroom can make that all the more meaningful when it's the right moment. So, you know, there is no right or wrong way. I think it's all a very personal decision how quickly we get into sex with somebody. But I think that from what my readings tell me is that usually the quicker that we get into sex, the less probability this will be a long-term relationship.
Yes, the research doesn't seem to indicate that it lasts longer than relationships that wait. It seems to show that it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very emotionally charged in the beginning. And then very quickly, let's say like a month or so, there's like a dramatic drop. And then you're trying to figure out, okay, what do we actually have in common? I remember someone, I spoke to another coach and he shared a story where these two, I forgot where they met, but they met each other. They went out a couple of times and they had sex very quickly. And they both were on vacation, so it was like sex every day. And as they were parting their ways after the week of vacation, they were trying to plan if they're going to meet up, but they couldn't figure out why they're going to meet up other than the sex. But because they're going to meet up in their hometown now, they can't just be as wild on this getaway. So it quickly fizzled out. And that was after a week of hot passion, just like we've all seen in those movies, soap operas, things like that, tearing each other's clothes off and neighbors ringing the doorbell, telling to keep down the noise and all this other stuff, right? So it makes me understand or at least acknowledge that sometimes if I don't know how to connect with you, I know that there's always going to be the connection in the bedroom. And if I push that, and you mentioned it earlier, I running on hope, okay, I can say, okay, I hope we have a connection outside the bedroom. But if we don't, then you're in trouble because you don't want to have relationship after relationship after relationship that's failed just because you don't know who the person is. Like what like when you work with the couples and maybe they're going through that, like what kind of impact do you see on couples who are coming to you who've had failed relationships previously and it's still a part of what they're bringing in into their current relationship?
Yes, I think you do raise a very important point, and it feels like it's somewhat a rite of passage to move from a chemical relationship to one where you're much more conscious and discerning of what values this person has and do they align with yours. For a long-term relationship to be successful, you need your top two values in common. And so it's really important that we're asking these questions ahead of time and to see, like, are we actually a fit? Is this person a nighttime person, a daytime person? Are they health conscious? Are they growth oriented? What kind of mindsets do they bring to the table? So I think that asking better questions up front and really being aware of, the chemicals going on in our body at the same time will lead to better outcomes. But I know some of us are so pulled by the hormones, it just can overcome us. I mean, end of the day, we are animals. And if you meet somebody on vacation, there are, can be no holds barred. It's hard not to, I would reserve judgment on that. But I think that if we are serious about finding a partner that will last, we do have to look beyond, the things we might have in common or personality, or we both like to golf. I mean, that's great. But, how do you want to live your life? What is the North Star for your relationship? What is it that you want to create together? Some of these bigger questions really get at the more meaningful relationships that will last over time.
In your experiences, is that difficult for people to address and to understand?
Well, I just don't think that many people are thinking through that. Even, I mean, I have couples in my practice that come in and they're still having discussions around, they're married and they're still discussing around whether they want to have children or not and what country they want to live in. These kinds of really big questions that should be part of, before you get married to somebody. All of that should be really part of a very intentional conversation to discern, are we really on the same page about all of these key things in relationship? At least going in. Certainly things can change, but you're having these hard conversations. I mean, you might be aligned on 9 things out of 10, but if you want children and they don't, that's not a go. And we have to be able to free somebody else up for the right partner for them if we don't have alignment on these key issues.
That's a big one. That is huge. And I say that because I don't want to have children and I'm 35, so I can still have children. So many of the women that I would date are around that age and they can have children. So if I were to date someone, let's say a few years younger, right? So let's say she's 32, 30. In her mind, if she doesn't have children, she's thinking, okay, before 35, I'm good. After 35, it's high risk, geriatric and things of that, the pregnancy, right? So that would have to be a conversation that we have because if I didn't have that conversation, I would feel bad that I'm kind of misleading this person because from a biological standpoint, so let's say we're together 5, 6, 7 years, and now she wants to push for children, and she's like, I probably can't have it. You've taken away someone's opportunity to do something that they would love to do. And maybe it's not your fault because they didn't mention it, but I think those are big, big conversations to have because it could have been that she could have been with someone before the feelings got strong to have children. But when you're in it a number of years, your emotions cloud your judgment. The way this person makes you feel, And the worst thing I can possibly think of that can happen is then you try to force the person, or the person says, you know what, Marissa, okay, I'll have kids. Like, do you really want to raise someone who just nonchalantly is agreeing to have children? What are your thoughts?
It's definitely not a healthy scenario. It's not something that you want to default back to. I mean, most of us come into relationship with very strong feelings around that. It's not something typically that we're going to be convinced otherwise. And so, especially, if women are on the track to having a child, we need to be very assertive up front and, have this in our profile if we're dating online or having these kind of conversations, up front so that your biological clock does not tick down because that has happened to so many women. And it's so, it's like the dream is dying. And I really feel for the woman. Children has not been my choice, but I know for many women it is. And you really need to take the reins when you're getting involved with a man, and because um, it's on you also. If you did not have that conversation and you're several years down the road and then you raise it, that's a little too late.
Yeah, because you biology is undefeated, right? And you got to put yourself in a difficult situation. I wonder how many women, and you deal with the couples, and I deal with women on my side. I wonder how many of the women will run off of hope, like you mentioned, and just wait and wait and say that he'll change. He'll do it for me if he loves me. Have you seen situations with the people you work with where there's one or maybe both of them are just holding on to the hope of maybe something that's really important to them, and as time goes on, it becomes like a sore spot. They become resentful because of it. It starts to fester, and then all of a sudden you start to see it come out in all these different ways. Have you seen that?
Absolutely. This is not atypical that, an issue like this kind of gets swept under the carpet. And I think sometimes as women, we have a lack of abundance mindset that we find somebody and we think, well, there cannot be anybody else who could, satisfy me this way. And so we feel that, well, maybe we do need to sacrifice what we want to be with this person, or like you say, run on hope. And so it is, you know, training our mindsets to really believe and have these shifts around what we want, and that we live in an abundant universe and we can hold out for what's important to us. Because I think that definitely is a trap that many people fall into, running on hope. And then, as you say, the resentment starts to eat up all the warmth between you, and then your sex life starts to suffer, and it becomes a very difficult situation to extract yourself from. There's so much pain that can come out of it because you have so much history you've created together.
You mentioned the sex life, and I think this is maybe something that doesn't get discussed as often, just because it is a sensitive topic. Right? The bedroom is still sacred to a lot of people. Have you come across situations where people underestimate the issues that they have in their relationship and the impact on the bedroom that it has?
So I think, as I mentioned before, is that intimacy is built outside of the bedroom. And so a lot of that's going to determine the health of your sexual relationship. And I know that sometimes women can weaponize sex if they feel like they aren't getting what they want from their partner. So it can be a very difficult ground to navigate. Again, without those skills, to be able to have those conversations and really understand what sex means to either partner and what it provides for each of them. Again, with my training, I came to understand how much sex is basically, it's like food to the masculine. It is something they cannot live without. It's so primal to their well-being, and not all women have that understanding. And so it can definitely lead to issues over time. And, I think having a great understanding of the opposite sex and our physiology is also key to having a great relationship.
I think there is a disconnect between the two. I will agree with what you're saying. And I have two examples where, from a male and female perspective, there's this young lady, she's been married. And what has happened, to your point, outside the bedroom, they would do certain things. Like she was a mother, but she was a mother, then she eventually went back to work, and he's always been working. And there's times where he wanted to be intimate with her, and she would say that I'm tired, things of that nature. So there was the depriving of it. But when she wanted something, she would use that to her advantage. I remember there's a time where she mentioned that if she just wanted to have sex with him, but she wasn't fully into it, I guess, at that moment, or she said, okay, I'm just gonna please him. She would use the words like, okay, you can just take it. And I think from a male perspective, and you can give me the female perspective as well, Marissa, as a man, I would hate to be with my girlfriend or my wife and sex has become that where it's like, okay, you can just take it. Because as a coach, when I take a step back and look at that, that is so similar to someone breaking into your home and taking it, right? The person doesn't want it. The person is just saying, okay, I'm just going to lay here. You just take it from me, and that's it. So what are your thoughts on that?
That is a very sad dynamic. And I think that it's not healthy for either partner. Men want to be with a woman who's engaged and enjoying it. And I think that there is a responsibility for women to figure out what's going to make them happy in the bedroom. I think that this is a bit of a working edge for women as well, is to understand what makes their body tick and what brings them alive and what has them be really turned on, and being able to convey that to their partner. I think that over time, women can get resentful and sex becomes a chore because they haven't blueprinted their own erotic life. And so I think that there's some work that can be done for women to say, you know, what would I need for me to enjoy this, and convey that to their partner. Because I think, again, men can be very giving and they want to please, but they have to know what works for the women. It's a two-way street, and it's not a taking exchange. It's meant to be, mutual, and a spiral of pleasure that really gains on itself.
So what are some steps outside of the bedroom? Because as you mentioned, that's where it starts, that the couples can work on, which can improve their overall intimacy levels to be healthy, whether they're inside the bedroom or outside the bedroom and throughout their entire relationship.
Well, I think one of the areas that's really important is to be able to have a repair process. Healthy couples clean as they go. A healthy relationship does not have no conflict, but you're working on cleaning these up and repairing from issues as they happen so that you don't build up that resentment. So you're having conversations that clear the air, because if a woman has resentment in her body, it will detract from her desire to have sex with a man. And so it's in her best interest to be vulnerable and to be sharing what's up with her man, in a clean way, without any blame, shame, criticism, so that her partner can hear her. So I think, the intimacy is about being vulnerable and sharing what's up for you, but in a healthy way. And cultivates that desire to be closer together. And that's when, the sex can really be much more juicy and enjoyable.
Is that why making sure that there's closure on these issues is so important? And to quote something that is famously said, don't go to bed angry. Is that where that comes from?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's, we'd like to have that be the case, but I know certainly for myself, I know that I was too activated in that moment um, to deal with it. And so the next morning, I was much more resourced to be able to have the conversations with my partner. So it, can be case by case, but you definitely want to be in the right state so you can have these really up-level conversations of repair with your partner. I think that the quality of your relationship is the quality of your repair process. It's the first skill I teach couples. And, again, it's something that we're not taught in the culture. But if you want to cultivate these kind of skill sets, just like you did in your career, it's so important to take this on board.
So take us through that repair process. What does that look like for couples? Because I'm pretty sure there's some people who are maybe not in a relationship that want one. They can kind of do some quote unquote pre-work to make sure when they enter a relationship, they're already a step ahead or two.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion is to be able to, practice with the people in your life as things come up. The repair process that I teach people is called the feedback wheel. It comes from my teacher, Terry Real, and it's four-step process, two sentences each. And you are simply sharing what you saw or heard on the videotape that upset you, that your partner did, how you felt about it, what you made up about it, and what you would like differently next time. So it gives your partner an idea of what happened internally and what the impact was, and a request for something different versus a complaint or you did or you always or you never. And so it's just simply sharing your reality, and then your partner has the ability to respond to that and provide that for you, or in whatever form that is. So it's a one-way conversation, typically to start, and then if the other person is still activated, then you can have a two-way conversation. But I think when you're first learning, you can do this on something that's really low charge in your life, that's not going to cause a lot of upset. And then as you build that muscle, you can handle more and more over time.
Is that hard for people to do when they're especially the language aspect of it, instead of you did this, you did that? Like, is that, I don't want to, well, many people say, like, I'm thinking of like the therapy days, like rewiring someone's mind. Is it difficult to get them out of that language and say it in the way that you did?
It is. There is a whole process that we need to go through. And one of the first things I teach also is boundaries, and that is includes listening boundaries. So if somebody's speaking and you don't agree with them, and you feel like it's not true, that splashes off the windshield and you don't react. So it is working on your ego to bring it to a more wise and mature place so that you can actually hear what your partner has to say. And then also, speaking from the I, we've heard this many times, and also speaking with feeling words. So non-feeling words are, you rejected me, you abandoned me, versus I felt really sad and upset when you did this thing. And so there is a number of skills that we have to bring on board for this all to come together, which kind of lends itself from nonviolent communication and boundary work and self-esteem work. So there are some pieces, but once you practice it, it does get better over time.
When I was having a conversation about a conflict in one of my previous relationships and we would talk about it, the person, when they were speaking, I was attentive because I think that's important to listen to understand. And I think a lot of people miss that step when it comes to conflict resolution. Another one was we what I used to do is when it was my turn to explain, she would refuse to answer any questions and she would make up her face that was very noticeable when you were explaining something to her. And I mentioned this to her a couple of times. And I said, you give off the impression that your questions are more important than mine because you want answers to yours, but you don't want to answer questions that are posed to you. And you're making faces like a child, right? So I told her that it may be something that is just natural. You're not doing it intentionally. Like it could just be natural reaction, but you should be aware of it because if someone comes to you, they have a problem and you're making strange faces, it's a distraction. Unfortunately for her, instead of taking the feedback, she would get defensive. So it came across as, okay, you're making those faces on purpose. But what if it was someone that that's their natural response but it's not intentional and it's not with any malicious intent. The person who is receiving those kind of reactions, how would you coach them to not overreact or not take it in a negative light if possible during that interaction?
That's a hard one. What I make up is that this person is really enmeshed with their younger self, and the faces are a reflection of that upset child or teenager. And so they're leading with their wound instead of with their wise adult self. And so part of the crucible of relationship is growing ourselves up. It is a very difficult and confronting process, especially when we get feedback from our partners and we think we're showing up so well. But our partner is our teacher. They are there to, you know, actually trigger some of these things that actually are there to be healed. There was a real opportunity there for her to take that feedback and show up in a different way. But if somebody is kind of consistently responding in this way, it's going to make it much more difficult to move through conflict. And you might end up getting mired down in childhood trauma patterns together if one partner is not willing to kind of see what's happening in the dynamic and lift themselves out of that. And it's not an easy process. And, you know, sometimes it does require professional help to shift out of that.
I will agree. I did mention that it is a form of immaturity that dates back to the younger years. And I've seen some people that they are unable to grow out of it. Like their response is still the response that maybe they gave when they're 6, 8. And it's difficult for the people I've observed, it's difficult for them to work through it, who are receiving that, because it's their state of mind from my conversation with them is that I'm being mature, I'm being an adult, I'm raising an issue, let's work through it together. And this other person is basically pouting. Right? Like that, for lack of a better word, like would that be what it's called, Marissa?
You could say that. I mean, it definitely is much more of a childish behavior. And if this is a pattern, then I would have questions about whether I would want to continue. And the way to test this is to kind of keep showing up in your relational, mature adult self and keep asking for what you're needing. And if that person doesn't respond over time, or, you know, start to create some shifts, or, you know, doesn't change their pattern at all, then these are clues that they're not really willing to meet you. And you don't have the same kind of work ethic, I guess you could call it, in relationship. There has to be an openness and a curiosity about what our partner is telling us. If it's done in a healthy way, you know, if we're slamming our partner, that's going to be hard for them to hear, of course. But if it's done in a loving, respectful way, then there is a responsibility on the part of the other person to really take that in and consider it, because it is a request for them to be more relational with you.
I look at those situations and I wonder if it's because they maybe have a childless view of relationships, meaning that I get into a relationship, I expect the intimacy to be good. I expect this person to always be happy, always be loving, and I don't expect any conflict, any resolutions. And I'm thinking that I am God's gift to this person. I wonder if I went into relationships thinking that, and then conflict arises, why would I take it seriously, or why would I view it in a mature way? Because I'm already coming in thinking that I can do no wrong, and relationships really are only about 3 things: give me sex, make me happy, and tell me you love me. It doesn't include anything else. Could that maybe be a factor that they're entering into it with a very immature thought process?
Yes, very much so. And unfortunately, the default thinking in our culture is, with regards to relationship, what have you done for me lately? And we need to, again, if we want a healthy relationship, you have to go outside of common consciousness and be much more aware of the way that we're showing up. And, our parents usually don't have a healthy dynamic, so we're not taught and we don't see the role models. We don't actually know what a healthy relationship looks like. I mean, how many movies have you seen where couples talk to each other in these mature ways? And so we don't really know what it means to kind of repair healthy. We've never seen it many times. So in a way, we can't blame those people if this is the default way that they show up. But if we want to have that healing process for ourselves and have somebody who can meet us, then we have to pick the right partner. 95% of relationship is partner selection. We don't realize that most of us spend more time picking out a placemat than we do a partner. As you mentioned, it's the chemistry, the frisson that we feel, the heart-shaped coffee barista experience, and I'm in. But we're not asking the questions, and we're not, discerning, is this a person who could meet me in conflict? Are we asking questions about how their last relationship ended and what was their part in their ending of it? These start to give us clues on how relational the person is and how much self-responsibility they're willing to take.
Do you think, what do you think we don't ask those questions?
We don't know these questions. I had to
Ooh.
learn all these questions, and it's a very painful process because sometimes we're so into the hormones already that we see that there's a red flag here and we still don't want to ask the questions. We're afraid. I know I've been there myself. I'm afraid to ask the question because I feel like I already know the answer. And so it's an education. I've had to read many books, hundreds of hours of teachers to learn a new way of being around relationship. It's a process.
I sometimes say that the questions we're afraid to ask is because we don't want the answer in our head confirmed.
Reality is very confronting, and
Mhm.
oftentimes we don't want to let the bad thing happen. We just rather go on, willfully acknowledging that there are things that and places we just don't want to go. And in some couples, that's actually how they live. It's just they have an unwritten agreement that they don't speak about certain topics. They don't really have those deeper levels of intimacy. It's more, maybe a different type of dynamic. It's more transactional. I will pay for your lifestyle if you show up for me in these other ways. So it does unfortunately happen in our culture. And so it's an individual choice we each need to make.
It is, it is. And I hope that, see, what I find in some of these choices, Marissa, and tell me if you've seen this as well, is that what we accept today, we may not want to accept a year from now, even though we agreed upon it a year earlier. And then you put the person in a difficult situation because it's like, I'm going to use the men, for example. Well, I'm dating a stripper. I start to feel what I feel for her. We get together, we have a child, whatever the case is. 2 years later, can you stop stripping? Well, you knew I was doing that, and the agreement was that I was going to continue to do that. So, how can someone now go to that person and say, can you stop doing this? I know it's a little bit extreme, but when you mention transactional or more maybe a surface level relationship where I don't ask you questions that are too deep, it's always okay. How was work today? Oh, I didn't go to work. Instead of saying, wait a minute, you told me you were going to work, so where you actually were. Instead of asking that question, it's like, okay. Like eventually I always feel that there's gonna come a time where you're going to want to know why this person is telling you that they're somewhere when they're actually not. Do you see that dynamic, and what's your experience and thoughts on that?
Could I just ask you to flesh out the question a bit more?
Absolutely. So it's when someone is in a relationship where they agree to a certain behavior or behaviors of the person,
Yeah.
and now further in the relationship because maybe their feelings are stronger or just because time has passed,
Yes.
now they're wanting to question that same behavior that they agreed to, but now it's an awkward conversation because the person doesn't owe them the answer because they agree that they wouldn't give them the answer.
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult one because sometimes circumstances change or, so many dynamics can happen. And it's it's a personal choice as to whether or not that person then wants to agree to shift into a new agreement with that person. It's a conversation, it's a negotiation, and um, it's a hard one if that was kind of the terms that you agreed on going in, and then somebody kind of backpedals and decides, well, actually, no, I want my life to be a different way. Um, Very difficult, and some people may take that as a betrayal. Um, I prefer to believe that there are no accidents and that the universe is always teaching us lessons on what we need to learn. And so sometimes these can be very painful if we've really been invested with that person. But we need to be aware of what we need for ourselves to be healthy and comfortable in relationship. And sometimes that may change. And so then we are then free to seek that in another person and, set that person also free to find what works better for them, perhaps.
I think so as well. And I see this a lot with those who are do with what's it called? Friends with benefits, where it's just casual sex and they agree to have casual sex with one person.
Hmm.
I see some people saying that, okay, would it be okay if we do something more instead of, let's say, every night we have sex on a Thursday? Let's say we go to dinner and something else. And the person's like, no, it's strictly this. And then you see the person get actually hurt and emotional about the situation. And I wonder how much of that is maybe they finally realized that I'm being used in a way, or I feel empty, or maybe to your point, right? They're like, okay, I want to take my life in a different direction. But oddly enough, instead of taking their life with a in a different direction with someone else who can give them maybe what they want to pull this old person into the new version of them when this person's like, no, I want it to stay like this.
Well, I think the issue kind of happens before that, and it's something that we call silent agreements. And so often we each enter a relationship or a dynamic, be it a short term or long term, with an idea in our head of how it's going to go and what we think the partners agree to without having that tacit conversation. I'm not aware of very many people who say, okay, just so we're on the same page, we're just going to be having a sexual relationship. We're not going to be, spending extensive periods of time together. I won't be taking you out to dinner. Like in my experience, these conversations are not happening. And so I think that, we're a culture that is afraid to have these conversations. Again, we're not taught to really set boundaries and express what we desire and negotiate with our partners on what would best work for us. It's hard to navigate all of this. We are, you know, coming up with all these different relationship dynamics, whether it's a throuple or polyamory, and we don't yet often have the skill sets to navigate that. We see it's something we desire and might be exciting to play with, but a lot of hearts are getting wounded because we don't have the skill sets to navigate it.
So it's like, I'll have enough sex with her until she loves me. Then when she loves me, I can move into the next phase. I wonder, that must be so heartbreaking to realize. Like, I haven't been in that type of relationship, but just looking on the outside,
Mhm.
when I deal with the women who have, they legitimately seem heartbroken.
Yes, because women go into fantasy very quickly. The feminine search for love is a very strong pull. And one could argue that that's why we've come into this lifetime, to love and be loved. But the male wiring isn't always the same. I think that the evidence suggests that we are actually more wired for serial monogamy. And so sometimes it doesn't work out in these dynamics, and women had so much more built up in their heads than happened in reality. And they're going on information that really wasn't there. It was created in their head. And so this creates so much heartbreak um, because they have been living in a fantasy in their mind, and then it breaks.
Sometimes the fantasy inside our heads is so much more appealing and comforting than the reality in front of our face.
Yes, very much so. So again, this is something I learned the hard way, to be able to have these, very explicit conversations with a partner about, what's happening in our dynamic, and what the expectations are, so that we're on the same page and there isn't the hurt feelings.
So as we close, Marissa, what tips or what last words you want to say to our audience today, especially those who are in relationships and they want to continue to improve it and get to the point where it is exactly the way they want it to be?
I would say there's a couple of really important lessons I've learned along the way. And one of them is that love is and intimacy is something that we do. It's not something that we just have. You have to be proactive, and it's a skill that we can really learn. Another one is that learning to be able to regulate your nervous system and handle an upset partner are really where your freedom lies in relationship. And learning how to do that is such an important skill. And also, I would say that much of what is running our relationship is unresolved trauma. And so I feel like sooner or later, that is something that each of us need to address, however big or small our trauma is, because many times it's running our relationship. And so it's about waking up and growing up so that we can show up for our partners.